Can you believe it's really been 8 years since the launch of the Nintendo Switch? I don't think I need to explain in much detail the position Nintendo was in after the Wii U. The 3DS just so happened to perform well enough for them to last the generation, and many of us didn't know what was coming next. With Nintendo experimenting with the mobile market with Pokemon Go, Super Mario Run, and Miitomo, it wasn't far-fetched to believe that Nintendo could have gone down the Sega route after the Wii U's massive failure. It wasn't until October 2016 when we finally got our answer. The Nintendo Switch was unlike anything we'd ever seen. A console you could play on the TV and on the go. It seemed like the Wii U on steroids, and that's pretty much what it ended up being. The hype for this thing was unreal, and all of that proved itself the day the Switch launched on March 3rd, 2017. It didn't matter how little games were available on day one. The start of the new generation and the sheer hype and idea of the Switch was enough to get everyone flocking to stores to pick it up. I got my Nintendo Switch during Christmas time in 2017. I was 11 years old, it was just a few months after launch, and that experience opening that box and setting it up for the first time was magical. And despite that, the first thing I remember saying after opening it was, we should have got a Wii U. I'm actually so glad that I forgot about that the next day, because then it was time to play it for the first time, and that was what really changed everything. The first game I ever got for it was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, an early Christmas gift from my dad, and for that, it's by far my favorite Switch game next to Smash Bros. Ultimate. It wasn't just games I got either, I mean, just look at all these controllers I've got for it over the years. These aren't all of them either. It's because of all that, the Switch is such a special console to me, and is the sole reason I started this channel in the first place almost 2 years ago. The Nintendo Switch was undoubtedly defined by its massive lineup of first-party titles, and while it did receive tons of third-party support, the mileage on that was pretty lackluster, especially near the end of the console's life. The Switch seemingly brought in a new era of not just new games, but ports. And I mean a lot of ports. But we got huge new games from pretty much all of Nintendo's main franchises. The Legend of Zelda with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom changed the franchise forever. Mainly Breath of the Wild, but still. Mario was seemingly coming out of his drought from the early 2010s from the new Super Mario Bros. Game's lack of personality, and Nintendo gave us Super Mario Odyssey, Super Mario Maker 2, the very refreshing Super Mario Bros. Wonder, plus remakes and remasters for Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, and they even brought back the Mario and Luigi series with Brothership. Oh yeah, and Luigi's Mansion 3. Great game, by the way. Along with ports of New Super Mario Bros. U, Mario 3D World, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, and Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Oh, who am I kidding? I love all these games, so I can't really complain. Other big franchises of course got their treatment too, like Pokemon with the Let's Go games, Sword and Shield, Diamond and Pearl, Scarlet and Violet, Animal Crossing with New Horizons, Splatoon with 2 games this generation, Kirby with Star Allies, Forgotten Land and Return to Dreamland, Pikmin with the entire series 1 through 4, Metroid with Dread and Prime Remastered, Fire Emblem with Warriors 3 Houses and Engage, and even the first North American release of the original NES game. Pretty much every franchise got some form of representation on the Switch. Not to mention the other remasters and remakes like Link's Awakening, Xenoblade, and Donkey Kong Country Returns. And how could I ever forget Super Smash Bros. Ultimate? This game was truly revolutionary. It didn't matter if it seemed like an enhanced port of Smash 4. It changed enough and added enough for it to stand on its own and surpass that game with ease. I remember watching that Nintendo Direct in March of 2018, seeing that we were finally getting a new Smash game in just a few months at that. It genuinely didn't feel real, and the moment that Solid Snake popped up on the screen and the game's catchphrase, "Everyone is here," I knew that this was the only game I needed. I picked the game up from my local GameStop just a month after release, and playing it for the first time felt so surreal. Smash Ultimate is truly one of my favorite Switch games. The DLC, online despite how garbage it was, and heck, even the spirits were in the edition, even if they got rid of the trophies for them. I still play Ultimate to this day, and I have by far the most playtime hours on it out of all my games. Even with all these seemingly great games, Nintendo messed up a lot with how unfinished some of them felt. The prime example is the Mario sports games like Mario Tennis Aces, Mario Golf Super Rush, and Mario Strikers Battle League. These games launched with hardly any content. They'd add stuff later with free updates, but it felt like they were really drip feeding content for the games for pretty much no reason, because by the time the games were finished, pretty much everyone stopped playing them. Speaking of drip feeding content, Nintendo Switch Online was probably the most egregious example. The service started off as a pretty acceptable deal when it launched as a paid subscription in October 2018, but over time, especially after Nintendo added other systems like SNES, GBA, and N64, they pretty much would only update and add new games when they felt like it. Gone were the days of monthly game updates or incentives to pay $20 or $50 a year with the expansion just to play online. And then there's how poorly some of their biggest games were optimized, especially the Pokemon games. Frame rates would dip all the time, graphics would glitch out, things would pop into view suddenly, and overall, they just weren't polished. This was definitely apparent with the third-party lineup on the Switch. It was, in all aspects, much stronger than the Wii U, but that came at a cost. While some games managed to do just fine on the Switch, of course with some graphical and frame rate downgrades, some games just couldn't handle the Switch's lack of power. And I highly doubt it'll be receiving much more major third-party support in the future. There were plenty of indie and less demanding third-party games that ran excellent on the Switch, and that really balanced out the games that struggled. This kinda painted the picture that Nintendo wasn't really focused on making sure their games ran well, even for their most important franchises. Not only that, it began to show just how outdated the Switch's hardware was, and the liberties Nintendo took to pull this thing off. However, Nintendo had another big problem on their hands, and that came with the Nvidia Tegra X1 processor they used in the Switch. While they took a ton of precautions with their software, they somehow forgot that their hardware was also exploitable. With that, it only seemed natural that this homebrew scene would begin not with the software, but with the already dated hardware Nintendo gave it. Just 10 months after the Switch's release in early January 2018, the cracks finally began to form. And the first showcase of a hacked Nintendo Switch was shown in a video by the hacking group Fail Overflow. By using a paperclip in the right rail where the Joy-Con is meant to slide in, the Switch was able to boot into recovery mode, and allow for a form of arbitrary code execution. And this was seemingly all that was needed to break the Switch's security. This one video kickstarted the homebrew scene for the Switch, and since then, it's had a lively homebrew community similar to that of the Wii's. However, Nintendo did manage to get around the hackers by releasing a revision of the Switch, known as the V2 or Mariko. This patched the hardware exploit and stuck with the Switch Lite and OLED, making it impossible to exploit the consoles with an RCM jig. With the Switch's life coming to a close, I expect that the modding scene will only become more relevant over time, and hopefully, it'll end up like the consoles that came before it in terms of its reliability and homebrew content. If you've seen my older videos, you'll know that I have a modded Switch, and it's really amazing what you can do with this thing once the lock is broken. Whether it be game mods, emulation, game streaming, and more, there's simply too much to talk about for me to mention here. Also, as I'm writing this, the Switch 2 has just been hacked. It's insane how fast these modders move, but I wouldn't hold my breath expecting any major software breakthroughs anytime soon. Anyway, as I was saying, by the time this video is out, it's already been 2 weeks since the Switch 2's launch, and it's definitely been one of the most, if not the most controversial releases for a console in a long time. The amount of negativity surrounding this thing is insane, and I'm not going to defend Nintendo for the choices they're making this generation. However, the appeal of the Switch 2 is undeniable. I mean, it's a sequel to the best-selling Nintendo console of all time. It's bound to be this way. I don't think that the Switch 2 will fail like some people have been discussing, but I do think it will meet its demand. The early sales figures have proven that. However, I do think that Nintendo's choices regarding the cost of entry will hurt them in the long run unless they cut the price or give a massive incentive to buy in. I definitely see it selling at least 80 million units over the next 5 to 6 years, but I do not think the Switch 2 will ever be able to beat the original. The Switch 1 is truly special, and despite it all, I thank you, Nintendo. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and until next time, take care.